The family that left a window open. Some disappearances are accompanied by screaming. Others, silence, and silence is worse, especially the kind of silence that smells like lavender and mildew. The kind that greets you at the door, not like a memory, but like something that never left. The house on St. Elia Ridge had been empty for 21 years when I arrived. Empty officially, anyway. I parked at the base of the hill because the gravel road had collapsed in on itself a few winters ago, climbed the last 2 kilometers on foot, and when I reached the tree line, the first thing I saw, above the pine canopy, above the little square steeple of what used to be a chapel, was a single window, still open. On the 3rd floor. It had snowed 3 days earlier. No tracks in or out. They say the DeSantis family vanished in early autumn, but the truth is no one's really sure when. No bodies, no evidence of travel, no open bank accounts. Just a letter left in the mailbox that read, "We go in obedience. Close the gate behind us." No one ever figured out what that meant. The local police closed the case after 6 months. Voluntary disappearance. Case file DSR-0199. You'd be amazed how easy it is to vanish when you're not on social media, when you homeschool your kids, grow your own food, and call your neighbors the unbaptized. But you don't leave a window open for 20 years without a reason. Before we go deeper, before we talk about the healing house, the forest recordings, the rule about not naming your children until they can quote scripture, let me just say one thing. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And hey, leave a comment with your current location and the time you're watching, especially if you're alone. I like knowing who's still with me. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. There were 7 members of the DeSantis household, at least on paper. Antonino, the father, ran a small beekeeping operation out back. Lucia, the mother, was known for her faith tonics, which she sold in unmarked vials at the local market. The children, 5 of them, were never enrolled in school. In fact, no one in town knew their names. They came down to the village once a month. No shoes, no eye contact, whispering Latin to each other. One time, a girl at the corner store tried to hand one of them a juice box. The child screamed. Not like a tantrum either, like something primal had been violated. Lucia grabbed the kid and apologized, but not to the girl. To the air. "She is not permitted fruit until Pentecost," Lucy had said. Then they left, and no one saw them again after that summer. That's what brought me here. When I stepped into the house, it felt like I was walking into a photograph. Everything was still, like the family had just gone out for a moment. A loaf of bread left to rise, a cardigan draped over a chair. 7 toothbrushes and a cracked glass by the sink, each labeled not with names but Roman numerals. I, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. No mirrors in the house. Not one. They'd been removed. Even the medicine cabinet had a rough wooden plank nailed over it. There were candles melted into every windowsill, soot marks on the ceiling like something had burned for days. But the strangest part was the calendar. Still pinned to the wall above the table, it was open to September 2004. But every day from the 12th onward was scribbled out in red pencil. The same phrase repeated again and again in the margins. "We step out of time. We step out of time." I didn't sleep that night. You don't sleep in places like that. You wait and you listen, and sometimes the place listens back. Around 3:20 a.m., something knocked. Not on the door, on the walls. 3 gentle taps, then silence, then one more. It could have been the wind. It could have been a bird. But there were no birds on St. Elia Ridge, at least not since the last landslide wiped out the lower forest. That's another thing people don't talk about, how the landscape itself started shifting the same year the DeSantis disappeared. 3 sinkholes, 1 collapsed well. No explanation. I tried to sleep on the old couch, but the springs made a sound like teeth grinding, and I kept thinking about the window upstairs, the one that had been open when I arrived. I decided I had to see it, not to close it, just to know. So I climbed. The staircase was narrow, winding, built like something out of a convent. Each step creaked under my weight like it hadn't been tested in years. But the air up there, it wasn't stale, it was sweet, faint smell of sage and rosewater. The third-floor room was empty, except for a music box, still open, still playing the same slow, clinking lullaby. Over and over. The bed was stripped. The wall had writing all over it in soft charcoal. She sleeps beneath, not above. We are not healed by presence. Remember the window. And on the sill itself, drawn in a child's hand, if you open it, you have to stay. The moon was full, and through that open window you could see the whole valley below. Empty roads, frozen trees, no signs of life, but something moved in the orchard. Just for a second, a figure, dressed in white, not walking, rocking, like it was trying to lull something back to sleep. I blinked. Gone. Sometimes you find cases where the people clearly wanted to disappear, and sometimes, like this one, it feels more like the place itself wanted them gone. 7 beds, 1 prayer bell. The beds were built into the floor as if the family expected earthquakes or exorcisms. 7 thin mattresses lined shoulder to shoulder, each one indented like the occupant had only just stood up. No pillows, no blankets, just the beds. Each had a wooden crucifix nailed into the headboard, hand-carved, probably by the father. But here's what didn't make sense. There was only 1 prayer bell. It sat on a small oak stand at the foot of the first mattress. Brass. Dull, dented, tied with a cord of what looked like plaited horsehair. And when I touched it, it rang. Not loudly, more like a hiss of metal inhaling. But it vibrated through the floorboards, and somewhere in the walls, I swear, something else responded. The air shifted. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt held. See, in traditional monastic communities, families often adopted shared rituals. A bell might mean prayer or confession or time to fast. But the DeSantises weren't monks. They were supposed to be a normal family, with jobs, chores, tax records, only they weren't. On the dresser nearby was a leather-bound schedule written in the mother's careful script. Open quote. 4 a.m., wake, 4:30 a.m., open with the reading. 5 a.m., bell, initiation. 6 a.m., meal. 7 a.m., lessons of temperance, noon, herbal distribution. 1 p.m., observe the stillness. 3 p.m., consecrated correction. 6 p.m., final plea. Close quote. That's how she phrased it. Final plea. Look, I'm not a religious scholar, but I've never heard that in any liturgical practice. And consecrated correction? That's not from the New Testament. That's from cults. If this was just about faith, it wouldn't be hidden this way. That's when I started counting again. 7 beds, 1 bell, 7 toothbrushes, 7 small wooden cups. But then why were there 8 sets of shoes by the door? One of them much smaller than the rest, toddler-sized. I checked the census again that night. Officially, 5 children, no birth dates, just 5 registered dependents between 1996 and 2003. That matches the beds. So either the shoes were a keepsake or someone had been left behind. Or worse, someone extra had been added later. A neighbor once told reporters that the kids were seen praying in the garden at dusk, kneeling in a line while the mother rang the bell. But what she remembered most clearly was that the father always watched from inside. Never outside. Never praying. Just watching through the 3rd-floor window. The open one. The more I found, the less sense it made. You know those moments where the story starts folding in on itself, like a hallway that looks normal, until you realize the doors don't lead anywhere? That was this house. In the downstairs pantry, behind a rusted rack of herbs, I found something folded in wax paper. A letter, unsent, addressed to no one. It read, open quote, the last one has begun resisting. We've reinforced her boundaries with the bitter draught. But she is still questioning. She is watching me while I sleep. If she does not comply before the feast, I will ask for a formal exclusion. She cannot unclean the rest. Close quote. What parent writes like that? What child is unclean? I wanted to tell myself it was a metaphor. Something poetic. But then I found the drawer. It was locked. Brass keyhole, no handle. I pried it open with a screwdriver from the barn. Inside were 7 photographs. Each showed a child kneeling in the same patch of dirt, backyard, under the old apricot tree. Their faces were obscured, painted over, except one, a boy, maybe 6 or 7, wide-eyed, pale, no smile. Someone had written in tiny script beneath his image, Bellbearer 3, still speaks in sleep. You know how every group seems to have one kid who sees too much? That was him. And if he was 3, who was I? And where was 8? The last photo wasn't of a child, it was of the window. The 3rd floor one. Same angle I saw when I first arrived, but in this photo taken from the orchard, there was clearly something in the window frame. Not a person, just a shape. Hard to describe. Almost as if the window had rippled, bent inward like someone had leaned into the glass without reflection. A crease in the sky, and then, behind me, something creaked. I froze. Just the wind? Probably. But it came from the upstairs hallway. One long, dragging sound like bare feet on old wood. No one there. Just the bell, still swaying slightly in its cradle. I didn't touch it again. Instead, I packed up the photos, sealed the drawer, and backed out of the room slowly. There's a rule I made on these sleep case investigations. Never run in the house where people vanished. It's not about bravery. It's about not breaking whatever spell is still holding the silence together. But I'll say this. That bell, I think it was meant to call something. Or maybe keep something from waking up. Either way, 7 beds, 1 bell, 1 window open too long. And just before I shut the bedroom door, I saw it. A fingerprint on the inside of the glass. Small, greasy, as if someone had been watching me. The medicine that wasn't FDA approved. When you investigate disappearances tied to off-grid families, there's one word that always comes up. Remedy. Not medicine, remedy. It sounds softer, more innocent. A tincture brewed from herbs in the garden. A powder folded into warm milk at night. But in the DeSantis house, the remedies were something else entirely. On the second morning, I found the cabinet. It was behind the pantry wall, disguised as shelving. A false panel, warped from years of moisture. The moment I pulled it open, the smell hit me. Clove oil, vinegar, sage, and something sharp underneath, like ammonia and crushed dandelion roots. The shelves were full of brown bottles, all unmarked, no labels, no instructions, no safety seals. And nestled between the jars, I found a notebook, handwritten by Lucia, titled Corrective Doses, Winter to Pentecost. I'll read you the first entry. Open quote. Formulation for defiance in young souls. Equal parts hyssop, crushed poppy stem, and milk from day 3 goat. Add bitter root. Shake 11 times. Apply before dawn with prayer. Do not let child see your eyes during application. Close quote. I didn't make that up. No doctor ever prescribed that. No medical journal ever recommended eye contact avoidance during dosing. But according to Lucia's entries, she had developed an entire medicinal schedule based on behavior. She believed illness came not from germs, but from what she called spiritual hesitations. And if a child hesitated in obedience, they were considered infected. At first, I thought this was just religious extremism. But then I found the fridge, still humming somehow. The house had no power. I don't know how it ran, maybe solar batteries buried somewhere, but it was cold, and inside were 6 syringes, individually wrapped, dated in Lucia's same script. Open quote, Fear 14-4. Shame sent 4604, Sleep 3 52104, Return to 63004, Nullify on 7904. Ascension 88104, close quote. 8. There were 8 syringes, and if you've been keeping count, you'll know that's one more than the number of registered children. You ever see a parent label a syringe with the word nullify? Lucia wasn't curing anyone, she was managing them. In a locked drawer beneath the fridge, I found receipts from an herbalist in Bari, over 2 hours away. She'd been buying obscure roots, purgatives, psychoactives. Some of them are banned in most of Europe. You can't even Google them without getting flagged. One in particular stood out, Belladonna ocularis. It's not real, not in any database. But Lucia's notes describe it as a truth-tearing agent used to distinguish dreamers from sleepers. She used it, apparently, in something called the Cup of Final Knowing. Let me pause here for a second. I know it sounds theatrical, cultish, but this was a family, a real one, with neighbors, bills, a dog that used to bark every Thursday when the mail came, and yet none of this exists on public record. No arrests, no missing persons report, no death certificates, only local rumors, only that single line, "We go in obedience." There's an open academic debate about how to classify these cases. Are they cult disappearances, domestic isolation, religious psychiatric disorders passed through generations? But I've started wondering if the real debate isn't medical or spiritual. It's architectural. The way this house is built doesn't make sense. The medicine cabinet was 3 meters behind the pantry wall, wedged between the exterior structure and an old fireplace. No one would build that by accident. And above it, a narrow crawl space that didn't show up on the house plans. So naturally, I crawled in. You want to hear something weird? The temperature dropped instantly. No airflow, no vents, but the space was freezing, and in the dark, my hand touched something smooth, a ceramic bowl, sealed with wax. Writing around the edge, open quote, "Deliver the false children unto sleep," close quote. Inside, charred paper, burned at the edges, still whole enough to read. Open quote, 7 rejects the bitter draught. She asks the name of her reflection. I have withheld mirrors. I have denied her song. Still she speaks in forbidden syllables. I fear she dreams in rebellion. Close quote. This wasn't punishment. It was control. One long, slow sedation of an entire family. And whatever Lucia was trying to keep out, I'm not sure it ever left. Funny thing, I started hearing a sound again while reading the last entry. Very faint, like stone tapping against metal. I followed it, thinking maybe it was wind against the pipes. But it was coming from the prayer bell. It was ringing on its own, not loud, just a tremor. I didn't run, but I did leave the room. I went back to the pantry and stood still for 20 minutes, pretending I was part of the wall. Eventually, it stopped. Look, I can make jokes sometimes. That's part of the gig, helps people sleep. But even I won't joke about syringes labeled Ascension and kept cold 2 decades after the users vanished. Even I won't joke about medicines invented to erase defiance. There's a reason nobody in the town talks about the DeSantis family anymore. It's not because they forgot. It's because they're afraid they didn't actually leave. And maybe, just maybe the last dose didn't take. The missing baptism records. You'd think in a case like this, deeply religious family, daily devotionals, a crucifix over every bed, you could at least count on one thing being present in the record books: baptisms. But when I visited the parish office in Monte Arpino, the nearest village to St. Elia Ridge, I found nothing, not one. No baptism certificates for any of the DeSantis children, not even a marriage record for Lucia and Antonino. According to the church, this devout family never stepped foot in God's house. The old priest at the time, Father Marco, died in 2008. His replacement, Father Paolo, was gracious when I asked about the family. Too gracious. Gave me warm tea, offered a tour of the sacristy. But when I brought up the children directly, his whole demeanor changed. Open quote, "They were not in the fold," he said. "They chose a path of silence. It is not for us to chase the wolves." Close quote. Wolves? I asked if he meant heresy. He didn't answer, just said something in Latin under his breath and crossed himself. So I dug deeper. You have to understand, in Italy, parish registries often go back centuries. Everyone is in there, even the black sheep, but not the DeSantises. It's as if they edited themselves out. I started pulling town census files. That's when I noticed a pattern. In 3 consecutive years, the birth section had margin notes in a different hand. Scribbled, faint. Open quote, refused official rites, rejected font of life, counter-sacrament observed privately. Close quote. Counter-sacrament. That's not a thing. Not in Catholicism. That's the kind of term you find in old excommunication letters, in dusty books with red covers and no ISBN. And yet, at the back of the church, in a dusty alcove I wasn't meant to explore, I found a small side altar. It had been boarded up recently, too. New nails, clean wood. I pried it open when no one was looking. Inside, a dry baptismal font, cracked and empty. Above it, a painted icon of St. Elia, but his eyes had been scratched out. Beneath the icon, a sealed envelope tucked behind a panel. Open quote, Lucia D. 11th April 2002 confession, private, close quote. I didn't open it right away. I brought it back to the ridge like an offering. That night, I sat in the room with the beds and read her confession out loud, just to see what might happen. It began like this, open quote, we baptize them ourselves. We do not trust the hands of men. We anoint with bitter water and sweet oil, and we seal not in his name, but in the name of what came before. Close quote, close quote. Excuse me. What came before? Lucia wasn't just stepping away from the church. She was stepping into something older. Another passage read, open quote, we do not record the names of those not yet made whole. Names are bindings, like we delay them until their souls are stable. Those who resist do not get names. They get silence. Close quote. That explains the toothbrushes labeled I through 7. It also explains why none of the children were ever heard speaking in town. They weren't allowed to speak until Lucia and Antonino deemed their souls aligned. I kept thinking about that. The act of deliberately withholding a child's name. What does that do to a mind? To a spirit? It reminded me of a case in rural Hungary where a boy disappeared for 3 years and was later found living under a false name given to him by a group that believed his real one was unclean. He didn't remember the original. You strip a name long enough, it doesn't grow back. By midnight, I couldn't stop staring at the confession letter. The ink had started to smudge just a little around the phrase, they get silence, like it had absorbed humidity or breath. I decided to check something. Back in the medicine cabinet, I'd found a short list titled Names We May One Day Earn. I pulled it out and compared the script. Same hand, but the names were off. They weren't Italian, not Latin. Some were almost phonetic gibberish. Open quote, Tharnell ish Murai Vela Tara Noen, close quote. These weren't placeholders. These were names you'd whisper in a dream and forget by morning. Somewhere between folklore and phoneme. Unanchored. And all of them ended with this note, open quote, to be spoken only when the child stops dreaming aloud. Close quote. Yeah. See, when you deprive a child of a name, a voice, and a reflection, they invent their own. And sometimes what they invent wants more space than you gave it. There's an ongoing debate in anthropology about invented language systems in isolated groups. Some are harmless, others take on religious weight. They become prophecy, direction. And in the DeSantis house, I think they became doctrine. And just when I was ready to file all of this under ritual gone too far, I found the baptism bowl, buried in the orchard, shallow clay, the kind used in first-century rites. Inside it, hair, child's hair, curled, pressed into wax, a ribbon tied around it with the word undone. You tell me that's just faith. I'll wait. And here's where the timeline fractures. The orchard dirt showed signs of being disturbed again, recently, as in within the last 3 years. That means someone returned, someone dug it up, someone wanted the past visible again, and not for closure. Probably not for healing either. I think someone wanted a reminder. A ritual needs remembering. Even when the people are gone, sometimes the acts linger. Sometimes they're incomplete. So now I'm left wondering, not whether the DeSantis family baptized their children, but whether they baptized them into something else entirely. Something nameless, something still watching from the 3rd floor window. The healing house in the pines. You don't notice it at first. From the back porch of the DeSantis house, if you squint past the dying orchard and the overgrown grass, there's a thin trail heading east. Barely there. Like a deer path or the remains of an old utility road. You'd miss it unless you were looking for a place where no light ever quite touches the ground. That's where I found the healing house. They'd carved it into the woods, a one-room cabin built with split pine and tarred seams, no insulation, no electricity, just a narrow door, no windows, and a faint iron smell that hits before you even touch the latch. Inside, it was exactly the kind of place you'd imagine when you hear the phrase, retreat for correction. The walls were completely covered, every square inch, with photographs. Hundreds of them, maybe more. All black and white, all showing children in the same position, kneeling, hands clasped, heads bowed, Some wore veils, some wore blindfolds. But the truly disturbing part, each photo was nearly identical, but not duplicated. Slight variations, posture shifts, one child biting their lip, another with tear tracks, different outfits, different days. They'd done this ritually, repeatedly, documenting each time. In the center of the room was a single wooden chair, low to the ground, no cushion, the back carved with words in Latin, open quote, "Ponitentiam agit," do penance, close quote. On the floor in front of the chair were dark stains, a circle of wax rings where candles had been burned down completely, and one rusted bowl coated inside with a sticky black residue, not ash, not mold. I know this sounds strange, but it smelled like honey and salt, and beneath that, metal, like blood. See, the DeSantises weren't just isolating themselves. They were building a system, a ritual calendar, a behavioral correction loop, and most importantly, a place to reset children who resisted. I found a drawer built into the cabin floor, hidden under a loose plank. Inside were 3 items. 1, a tiny leather-bound book titled The Wholeness Path. 2, a child's sock, still crusted with dried soil. 3, a folded piece of wax paper with a single sentence. Open quote, "She sang again last night. The trees leaned in to listen. I fear it is too late." Close quote. I sat in that cabin for almost 2 hours, didn't take photos, didn't touch anything else, just listened. And the longer I stayed, the more I noticed how quiet it was. Not normal quiet, dead quiet. No birds, no wind, no distant traffic, just the faint buzzing of a fly trapped behind one of the photos. And at exactly 3:33 p.m., the fly stopped buzzing. Not because it died, it froze, mid-motion, as if something hit pause. That's when the door creaked, just slightly. It didn't open, but the latch trembled, as if someone had touched it from the outside and then thought better of it. Ever hear the phrase, "held breath of a place"? That's what this was. The healing house wasn't abandoned, it was resting. In Lucia's notes, back at the main house, she referred to this place repeatedly. Sometimes she called it the Still Chapel, other times just below, even though the cabin is uphill from the house. One entry from July 2003 stands out. Open quote, "We brought V to the Still Chapel for the 3rd time. She continues to speak in the forbidden cadence. Her eyes do not reflect properly. She insists the trees say her name. I fear she has taken in the false air." Close quote. Now you tell me, is that the language of healing or exorcism? Here's the part I've been avoiding. Some of the photos in the healing house showed children I hadn't seen elsewhere, not in the bedroom, not in the family photos, not in the town registry. One was clearly a boy of about 8, curly hair, eyes locked directly on the camera, unlike the others. Beneath his image, written in soft pencil, open quote, "V8, the echo." Close quote. So that confirms it again. 8 children, not 5, not 7, 8. And one of them stared into the lens like he knew the photo would outlast him, like he knew someone would come later and ask the question I now can't stop asking. Where is Vate? I stepped out of the cabin around dusk. The sky had turned that strange, soft pink you only get in mountain ranges. And as I turned back toward the house, I realized something. From that angle, high on the trail above the orchard, you could see both the healing house and the 3rd floor window. Perfect line of sight. They were watching each other. Or maybe one was guarding the other. Academic debate time. Some experts argue that isolation rituals like this often create alternative cosmologies. In other words, the family builds its own sacred universe. Everything becomes part of the myth. The bed, the bowl, the tree, the child who sings at night, and the ritual only breaks when an outsider sees it. So maybe I just did. I should mention, before leaving the healing house, I found a handprint, small, on the inside of the door, made in wax. Someone had pressed their palm into warm wax and sealed the entrance behind them. That kind of thing isn't done in desperation. It's done in devotion, which means one of them walked in and chose not to walk back out. The voice in the forest. Some disappearances come with a trail of receipts, of witnesses and police reports. Others just vanish, like a sound cut off mid-note, and some leave behind nothing but an echo. I spent the night camped behind the DeSantis orchard, near the overgrown hedge line where the grass stopped pretending to grow. I'd set up my tent just below the old crucifix tree, where you could still see rusted nails driven into the bark like a forgotten ritual. You'd think being alone out there would be the scariest part, but it wasn't. What got me was how unalone I started to feel after midnight. Because around 2:14 a.m., the forest spoke. Not metaphorically. I mean, it spoke. I'd brought a field recorder, one of those sensitive little black bricks with high-gain mic loops, the kind used by bird watchers or paranormal investigators. I turned it on mostly out of habit. But when I played it back the next morning, I found something I hadn't heard in real time. At exactly 2:40:32, beneath the cicadas and wind, there was a faint, unnatural voice. A child's. Latin. Open quote, corpus mem, non sum hic, close quote. I ran it through a filter back in my rental car, trying to boost the mid-range tones. It didn't get clearer, but it got closer. Corpus mum means my body. Non sum hic means I am not here. You hear that in the woods behind a house where a family of 8 just vanished, and tell me you wouldn't feel your blood start to move sideways. Thing is, this wasn't an EVP. It wasn't ghost static or a garbled radio frequency. The tone was too clean, too articulate, like a kid whispering directly into the mic, like someone was waiting. Here's where it gets stranger. I left the recorder on all night. Between 2:14 and 2:46 a.m., there were 5 more anomalies. A clinking sound like coins being stacked, what sounded like paper tearing underwater. 3 slow knocks, rhythmic, deliberate. The distant bleating of a goat. There are no goats here. And at 2:44 exactly, a second voice. Older, male, just one word, open quote, silencio. Close quote, I know what you're thinking. This could be anything. A fox, a camper, wind, a vivid dream enhanced by atmospheric paranoia. But here's the part that kept me from sleeping for the next 3 nights. I went to check the recorder's position the next morning. It had moved, just a little, maybe half a meter from the stake I'd set it on. But someone had turned it ever so slightly to face the Healing House trail, which meant either I did it in my sleep, nope, or someone else had been within 10 feet of my tent while I was unconscious. Oh. And there were footprints, child-sized, bare, heading toward the woods. None coming back. I followed them until they disappeared into the moss. Here's something else. Every 12 feet or so, the footprints paused, just a little drag in the soil, like the child was turning around, watching. I felt sick. Not scared. Sick. Like the air pressure was suddenly too high and my skin didn't belong to me anymore. I sat down on a stump near the edge of the forest and tried to calm myself. That's when I noticed the tree carvings, dozens of them. They weren't initials or dates, they were words etched into the bark in crooked childlike handwriting. Latin again, the same phrases repeated, pax intra me, non video lumen, ad tenebras confugimus. Translated, peace within me, I do not see the light, we flee to the darkness. You don't learn that kind of Latin from a school book. That's ecclesiastical language, liturgical phrases. This family had trained their children to speak in prayers and shadows, to communicate in code, in secrecy. And if even one of them managed to leave a message behind, then maybe, just maybe, they didn't all go willingly. Academic debate? Theologians sometimes argue that certain fringe sects invent their own vocabulary for religious trauma. A child raised in such a system won't say, I'm in pain or I'm scared. They'll say things like, open quote, the light won't speak to me today, or I have been passed over. Close quote. That's not poetry. That's code for suffering. And it often goes unnoticed because it sounds like piety, like devotion. Back at the DeSantis house, the 3rd floor window still hung open. It hadn't moved since I arrived. But I noticed something hanging from the sill I hadn't seen before. A piece of yarn, faded red, dangling just far enough to reach the brick ledge below. A signal? A marker? I don't know, but when I tugged it gently, something dropped. A rolled-up scroll of paper, wrapped in more yarn. The same red. It was a drawing. Crude, childish, crayon. No words, just 6 stick figures standing beneath a black sun. One figure was half erased, scribbled over with so much pressure the paper had torn, and in the top corner a tree with eyes. That night, I listened to the recording again, and this time at the very end of the tape, buried in static, so faint I almost missed it, was a single whispered word, Ilario, one of the children, the twin, the boy who had tried to leave. The prayer room. You can tell a lot about people by what they hide behind locked doors, but you can tell even more by what they leave unlocked, because that's what they assume you'd never dare open. In the DeSantis house, that door was at the end of the second-floor hallway. No lock, no doorknob, just a faded brass keyhole and a warped wooden sign above it, barely hanging on by a single nail. It had one word carved into it, open quote, ore, close quote, Latin again. It means pray. The door opened easily. The room was small, smaller than a closet really. No windows, no light fixtures, just a bulb hanging from the ceiling by a knotted shoelace, and 4 child-sized chairs arranged in a semicircle, all facing the opposite wall. And on that wall, painted directly onto the drywall in black sooty strokes, was an enormous eye. Not cartoony, not religious, not even human-looking. It was wrong. The proportions were off. Too tall, too narrow, almost vertical, pupil the shape of a candle flame. I stepped in slowly. The door creaked behind me. Now, let me say something clearly. I'm not one to rattle easy. I don't spook in the dark. But the second I crossed that threshold, it was like walking into a room that had been waiting for me. Like a conversation I wasn't invited to but had already started. The floorboards creaked unnaturally under my weight. They didn't squeak like wood. They groaned like something breathing through its ribs. Then I saw the tapes, 5 VHS tapes stacked neatly beneath one of the chairs, labeled in faded handwriting. Or a I, or a 2, or a 3, or a 4th, or a V. Each had a sticker, "Do not duplicate," in red ink. Against every ounce of good judgment, I took the top one and went back to my laptop in the rental car. I still carry a USB VHS converter for weird jobs like this. I hit play. Let me walk you through what I saw. The screen flickered to life, time-stamped June 3rd, 2003. The prayer room, same 4 chairs, one was empty. In the others sat 3 children, maybe 5 to 7 years old, blonde, pale, staring straight ahead. Each wore a black t-shirt with a white handprint on the chest. No one said a word. Then a figure entered frame, an adult, gender unclear, hooded in something like a nun's habit but rougher, handmade. They carried a long wooden staff with 5 metal rings dangling from the top, which jingled faintly as they walked. The figure knelt in front of the children and began chanting. Not loud, not forceful, just barely above a whisper. But the children responded. Not with words, with movements. Each child began a slow, synchronized motion, raising their arms like they were holding something invisible. Then they tipped forward, forehead to knees, and held the pose. Then stillness. For 6 full minutes. When the adults stood again, they leaned in and whispered something to each child's ear. But they didn't whisper the same thing. I know because the reactions were different. One child nodded, one looked confused, the last one cried. No screaming. Just a slow, leaky sort of weep like they'd just been told something unforgivable. Then the screen went black. The tape ran for 45 more minutes, but the rest was nothing but static. Like whatever was supposed to happen next was erased. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even shut my eyes. I sat in the car with all the windows cracked, parked under the sagging weather vane, trying to convince myself that what I'd just watched was some performance art. A prank. A cult LARP. Something that wouldn't keep living in my memory like an infection. But my brain kept coming back to the black t-shirts. The white handprint. That symbol meant something. It had to. I ran an image search on it, scanned through old cult iconography, secret orders, obscure rites. Finally, I found a hit. Not exact, but close enough to make my stomach flip. It was associated with an obscure heretical sect from 14th century Italy, Manus Dei Tenebris, open quote, the hand of God in darkness, close quote. A group that believed children could be mirrors for divine messages if they were kept spiritually pure and socially invisible. That meant no names until their 7th birthday. No eye contact with strangers, no mirrors, no television. And most disturbingly, no sleeping alone. The idea was that God's whispers could only be heard by children who shared dreams through contact, synchronization, and nightly confession. Which brings us to the next horror. In the far corner of the prayer room was a hatch in the floor, under a blanket. Why a blanket would be draped there, I don't know. Maybe someone tried to hide it in a rush, or maybe someone wanted me to find it, because the moment I lifted it, my flashlight beam hit something that still doesn't sit right in my mind, a ladder going down, not a staircase, not a trapdoor, a straight vertical wooden ladder with 13 rungs and something scratched into the beam. Open quote, confessio vesperae, close quote. Evening confession. I didn't go down. I'm not brave, just curious. But even I know when something says confess here and there are no steps back up, that's a one-way trip. Academic debate? Some anthropologists believe there's a consistent thread across cultic traditions, the use of ritualized repetition to suppress identity and encourage communal ego death. Children especially are malleable under these conditions. If you take away a name and give them only a symbol, say a handprint on a shirt, they stop thinking of themselves as people. They become tools. I went back upstairs. Every part of me told me to leave, to go back to the city and burn my notes. But before I closed the door, I took one last look at the wall, at the eye. And I swear, it looked different. The pupil had changed. Before, it had been a simple black slit. Now it was looking at me. The whisper game. I didn't plan on coming back the next day. I told myself that watching just one of those tapes had been enough, that it had filled in all the blanks I needed for the job, that the eye wasn't really watching me and I didn't really feel a cold breath on the back of my neck as I drove back to the motel. But then I dreamt of the ladder. I dreamt of climbing down it, barefoot, in total darkness, my hands sliding over something damp on the rungs. I didn't hit the bottom, I just kept climbing. And eventually I realized I wasn't going down anymore, I was going up. When I woke up, I couldn't move. For about 2 minutes, my body was completely still, like it had forgotten how to be mine again. And somewhere in that dream fog, I heard a voice. Not like in a horror movie, more like a kid sitting next to you on a school bus. Calm, curious. It asked, open quote, do you want to hear what they said? Close quote. That's why I went back. The sun wasn't even up yet. I didn't shower, I didn't eat. I just drove straight back to the DeSantis house and let myself in like it had never stopped being mine. The prayer room was the same. Same chairs, same eye, same tapes. I took the second one this time, Aura 2, and popped it into the converter. This one was different. No timestamp, no adult, just the kids. 4 of them now. The empty chair was full. The camera was slightly tilted like someone had knocked it on the way in. And for the first full minute, the kids didn't move, not even to blink. Then they turned in perfect unison to look directly at the camera. One of them, second from the left, began to speak. Only it wasn't speech exactly. It was a whisper, and I mean whisper, like leaves brushing against your ear. I had to crank the audio so high my laptop hissed like a snake. But once it came through, once I could hear the words, I felt my spine go stiff. Here's what they said. Open quote, close your eyes, breathe in. There are children inside you, let them out. Close quote. The next one took over. Open quote, she's under the house with her mouth full of sugar, but she won't eat because she's not allowed to chew. Close quote. Then the next, open quote, the blood in the well tastes like hands, and we drank until the day turned backward, close quote. And finally, the last one, open quote, you already came down the ladder, you just forgot the climb. Close quote, the screen went black again after that, but this time, not for long. It flickered back to life with a completely different scene, a birthday party, outside, daylight, balloons and paper hats and mismatched folding chairs, maybe early 2000s. But something was wrong. There were no faces, every child, every adult, faces blurred, not pixelated, not censored, just melted like wet paint under a heat lamp. And only one figure had any detail. A girl, about 6 or 7, dirty blonde hair, wearing the same black shirt with the white handprint. She wasn't playing. She was just staring at the cake in front of her. No candles, no name, just white icing and a small card that read, "Welcome to 7." She looked up suddenly, directly at the camera, and smiled. Then the tape ended. I had to walk around outside after that. I needed air. Something about that video made me feel like I'd swallowed someone else's memory. Like I was walking around with thoughts that didn't belong to me. And then I remembered the whisper from my dream. Open quote. Do you want to hear what they said? Close quote. Who were they? Who were those kids? I pulled out a notebook and started cross-referencing disappearances from the surrounding counties. And after a couple hours, I found something that clicked. In 2004, a small-town newspaper in Clear Lake, Texas reported a local church had been quietly closed down after multiple families left the congregation due to doctrinal concerns. The article mentioned almost in passing that 4 children had relocated with their families to another unnamed religious community. There were no follow-ups, no photos, except one name stood out, St. Aura's Fellowship. There it was again. Aura. I couldn't find a location for the fellowship, just a rumor that it had operated for years on private property with no formal address. The article was pulled offline a year later. Academic note here. Researchers in religious studies have long debated the vanishing doctrine theory, that certain fringe sects embed instructions for disappearance into their belief systems. That is, the ultimate act of faith isn't martyrdom, it's erasure. Not dying for a belief, but removing yourself so completely that your story becomes someone else's nightmare. I went back into the house and pulled ORA 3 from the pile. But this time I noticed something odd about the labels. The first tape was handwritten in blue ink, the second in red. This one, black Sharpie, and the writing looked shakier, like someone had written it while their hand was shaking. And worse, the tape was warm, like it had just been used. I checked my laptop timestamp. Today, 8:13 a.m., last modified date on the tape, 8:12 a.m., 1 minute earlier, which was impossible. These tapes are analog. You can't just edit them like a YouTube video. And yet, there it was, fresh data updated in real time. Like the house knew I was watching and was giving me new things to see. I didn't press play. Not yet. Because something else happened then. I heard a sound. Not in the house. From my laptop, from the laptop speaker. A child's whisper, barely audible, crawled out of the machine. Open quote, "You shouldn't have come back." And then my screen went black. The tape that wasn't there. I don't scare easy. At least not anymore. But when my laptop went black and that whisper slithered out of the speakers like something that had been waiting inside the circuits just for me, I'll admit, I shut the whole thing and backed away. Like it had teeth, like it could bite. And the worst part, I recognized the voice. It was the little girl from the birthday party on the last tape, the one with the white handprint on her shirt. She had spoken to me off tape. Now, maybe that doesn't sound all that strange in a world full of deepfakes and smart speakers and devices that listen when they shouldn't. But this laptop, it had no mic, no camera. I'd bought it specifically for cases like this. No wireless connection, no internet, just a clean machine for analog conversion, which meant that whisper was either recorded onto the tape while I was watching it, or something was inside the laptop. Something alive. I didn't play the third tape right away. Instead, I left. I didn't even lock the house behind me. Just grabbed my car keys, left the front door wide open, and drove until I hit a gas station off Route 11. I sat in the car, hands shaking, trying to convince myself I hadn't just heard what I'd heard. The cashier stared at me like I was lost, and maybe I was. I asked him if he knew the DeSantis place. He blinked a couple times, then nodded real slow. Told me it had been empty for decades, said a woman used to run some kind of church thing out there, but nobody ever saw her in town. Then he said, open quote, "You heard the whispers, didn't you?" Close quote. Dead serious. Not even joking. I just stared at him. Open quote. "That house don't want to be remembered," he said, "but sometimes it leaks." Close quote. Back at the motel, I tried to act normal. Took a shower, ordered something I didn't eat. watched a rerun of a game show I wasn't even following. But I kept thinking about that label on the third tape, Aura 3, written in shaky black marker, time-stamped to the exact minute I was watching the second tape. How was that possible? Only one way to find out. I waited until the sun went down. Then I turned the fan on low, cracked a soda for no reason, and popped the third tape into the converter. And instantly, something felt wrong. Not scary wrong. False. Because there was nothing on it. Not static, not dead air, just blankness. Total, perfect, intentional silence. And worse, the timestamp wasn't moving. No counter, no clock. The program didn't even recognize it as a playable file, just sat there like a dead thing in the machine. I ejected it, reloaded it, nothing. Now I was confused. And confused is a dangerous feeling when you're chasing a story like this. So I did something reckless. I picked up my phone, a burner I used only for field work, and called the last number in my investigation log. A woman named Sister Lorna, who'd appeared briefly in a 1997 wellness article from an old church newsletter archived in Kansas. I hadn't called her before because I thought the trail was cold. She'd been quoted about the communion of erasure, a phrase that had never shown up in any other source. Ever. But she picked up on the first ring. Open quote. "You've seen it," she said. Close quote. Not a question. Open quote. "I've seen part of it," I replied. Close quote. Long silence. Then open quote. "You're in danger. Stop watching." Close quote. Open quote. "What was Aura 3 supposed to show?" Close quote. Another long pause. Open quote. "That's the one they never finished." Close quote. My stomach tightened. Open quote. "Never finished?" Close quote. Open quote. "It doesn't show them, it brings them. That's why they buried it. That's why they stopped making the tapes." Close quote. Open quote. "Buried it where?" Close quote. She hung up. I called back. The line was like landline dead. The number didn't even exist anymore. At this point, I had two choices. 1, leave the tapes and run. 2, watch the blank tape again with something different this time. I went with option 2, but this time I set the playback speed to frame by frame. You ever scrub through a VHS frame by frame? It's like watching a ghost undress. I saw movement. Just one frame. It lasted a 20th of a second. Almost nothing. But it was enough. The image, a hole, circular, lined with mirrors, lit from above, and something crawling down inside it wearing the same black shirt with the white handprint. Frame, gone again. But that hole, that was real, and it wasn't a metaphor. I remembered something from my earlier notes. The original survey map of the DeSantis property had listed a well behind the house. It had been capped in 1999 by order of the health department. But what if it wasn't capped? What if it was hidden? I packed up everything, drove back to the DeSantis place with a shovel, a flashlight, and way too much adrenaline for a sleep case. I went behind the house, past the abandoned prayer garden and the rusted-out baptistry tank, and there it was. Overgrown, covered in moss and wood planks, but definitely man-made. I pried off the cover. A foul, iron-sweet smell hit me like a punch to the face. I dropped a rock. No splash, no echo, just a soft, wet sound, like breath through a throat that shouldn't still be breathing. I turned to leave, and something moved in the woods behind me. Not an animal. Too tall, it didn't come closer. It just whispered. Open quote. 4 down, 3 to go. Close quote. And then it vanished. I never even saw a face. But in that moment I knew Aura 3 hadn't failed to record. It had recorded something that couldn't be played. Or maybe something that wasn't meant to be seen yet. The ones who remember, let's do a little inventory, shall we? I had one tape that screamed when it played. One that whispered even after it ended. And now one that showed a well no one was supposed to find. And me? I was losing track of days, of where I'd parked, of what my own voice sounded like when I wasn't talking into a recorder. Not dramatic, just tired, but a specific kind of tired. The kind you get when you're close to something and every part of you knows it. Because remember, I wasn't the first person to chase this case. And by the end of this night, I wouldn't be the only one still alive who remembered it. I started digging through the last known logs of the House of Oracles, cross-checking names from the tapes, trying to trace anyone who might have escaped that commune before it went under. Most names led nowhere. Some were obviously fake. But then I hit a match. A woman named Francine Tellerman, listed as a junior caretaker in 1996, was now living under a new name, Fran Teller, retired, running a thrift store out of a converted laundromat about 30 miles south. I went. And before I even said a word, before I asked a question, before I mentioned a tape, she looked me right in the eyes and said, open quote, "They're watching you too now, aren't they?" Close quote. I swear I didn't speak, not even to say hello, but she beckoned me inside anyway, offered tea like we were old friends. I politely declined. My hands were shaking too badly to hold a cup. Her store smelled like rain and mothballs and something darker underneath. Old prayer robes hung on coat racks. Someone had turned communion trays into ashtrays. There were framed black and white photos with the eyes scratched out. The front door had no lock, but there were 6 different latches on the inside. I didn't ask why. She already knew why. Open quote, "You found the DeSantis house," she said. Close quote. I nodded. Open quote, "You saw the well?" Close quote. Open quote, "Just barely." Close quote. She closed her eyes. Open quote, "Good. Don't look again." Close quote. That's when she told me the truth, or her version of it anyway. Open quote, "We were told we'd disappear." Close quote. Open quote, "You mean spiritually?" Close quote. Open quote, "No," she said, "physically. Like a vapor, like something so holy, it wouldn't leave a trace." Close quote. At first, the cult was small, maybe 25 people, mostly women, mostly young, all from backgrounds where they weren't listened to or needed or loved. Francine was 17 when she joined. Open quote, "I thought it was a monastery," she said. Didn't realize it was a stage play." Close quote. What she meant was this: everything the House of Oracles did was for recording. Every prayer was captured. Every ritual lit just right. Every whispered confession directed by someone behind a lens. Not for TV. Not for the internet. Open quote, "For history," she said. They thought they were going to invent a new kind of memory, one that would replace the real world. Close quote. But then things changed. A visitor arrived, not a government agent, not a cop, a woman in a red coat who never gave her name. She didn't eat, she didn't sleep, she just watched and took notes. And then the dreamers began to vanish, one by one. Open quote. They called it elevation. I called it erasure. Close quote. Fran was there the night the well opened. It hadn't been dug, it had been revealed, as if something underground finally gave permission to be seen. Open quote. "You think I'm crazy," she said. Close quote. Open quote. "No," I replied. "I think you're the first honest person I've talked to since this started." Close quote. She reached under the counter and handed me something wrapped in waxed cloth. Open quote. "You won't like this," she warned, "but you need it." Close quote. It was a 4th tape, labeled in tiny print, Ore 0, original invocation, do not convert. I didn't ask how she had it. I didn't ask where it came from. She told me it had been recovered from the coat of the last girl to disappear, found folded into the sleeve like a final message. Open quote. "Don't digitize it," Fran said. "Play it analog, with the lights off, and only once." Close quote. Now here's where it gets fuzzy. I'd been careful, methodical, obsessive. But the second I left her store, I couldn't remember the address. I looked at my GPS, no route history. My phone was dead. My notebook had a missing page. I turned the car around to go back. But the store? Gone. Not closed. Not boarded up. Just never there. In its place, a strip of abandoned highway. Overgrown. Fenced off. The kind of place where a store might have been once, but certainly not now. I checked the map again. Nothing. Fran Teller had either erased herself again or never existed in the first place. The only proof I had was the tape and a deep, unsettling feeling that I was now part of something recorded. That night, I sat in my motel, staring at the tape. Aura 0, 0, as in the beginning, as in before memory. I popped it into my analog deck and turned out every light, put my phone in the fridge, turned the fan up to drown the outside world, and for 7 full minutes, nothing happened. Then the screen lit up. Not a person, not a face, just words. White text, black background, open quote, "This is the first name," close quote. Then, open quote, "Say it aloud," close quote. And then nothing. I didn't say anything, but something said me, right behind my ear, a breath I didn't recognize, and when I turned around, there was a handprint on the inside of the window, white, small, pressed against the glass like someone had tried to crawl out. I checked the room. Nothing. The tape ended in total silence. No scream this time, no whisper, just the sense that I'd opened something, or maybe it had opened me. The girl in the mirror. There's a specific way a motel mirror warps your reflection. It's not like a funhouse mirror, just subtly off. Your eyes are too close together. Your smile looks rehearsed. Sometimes if you stare long enough, it doesn't blink when you do. At least that's what I told myself. That morning, I was brushing my teeth with one hand and holding the fourth tape in the other when I caught something in the mirror that made me freeze mid-rinse. There was a girl standing behind me. Not a full-grown woman, not a shadow, not a blur. A little girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old. Long black hair, hospital gown, bare feet. She wasn't there when I turned around, just in the glass, and when I moved, she moved too, but not like a reflection. Delayed, like she had to think about copying me. I did what any sane person would do. I turned the mirror to the wall and left the motel. Checked out early, no refund, no shower, just gone. I didn't go back for my toothbrush, or my pillow, or my sanity, if I'm honest, because I knew 2 things. 1, the mirror didn't lie. 2, and I'd seen that girl before. Not in person. On one of the first tapes, partially obscured in the background, standing at the edge of a circle while everyone chanted. The camera never focused on her, but she was there, watching. I pulled over at a gas station and used the old metal payphone out front. Not because I was being cute or nostalgic, but because at this point, my phone wouldn't hold a charge for more than 5 minutes, and I wasn't ready to go full tinfoil hat yet. I called a contact I hadn't spoken to in years. Beth Owens, former crime scene photographer turned archivist. She owed me a favor, a big one. Open quote, "Do you have access to missing persons databases?" I asked, open quote, "Is that how you say hello now?" Close quote, open quote, "Sorry, hello, pup. Do you have access to missing persons databases?" Close quote, she sighed, then typed. I gave her a list of rough details. Age, possible location, time period, mid to late 1990s, New England, girl, possibly part of the House of Oracles. She got quiet. Then she said, open quote, "This is weird. There's one match, but she wasn't listed as missing." Close quote, open quote, "What was she listed as?" Close quote, open quote, "Dead." Close quote. The girl's name was Adira Kane. Died in 1997. Cause of death listed as ritual suffocation. But no body was recovered, no funeral, just a certificate filed by the commune's registered medical practitioner, which, by the way, turned out to be Dr. Greta Palling. Yep, the same name from the burned records I'd found near the DeSantis estate. The pieces were converging. The mirror girl wasn't a ghost. She was a recording. Or worse, a remnant. A piece of consciousness captured and embedded through ritual documentation. And if you're thinking that's a lot of woo-woo speculation, let me add this. When Beth tried to email me the scan of Adira's certificate, her computer froze and then crashed 3 times. She finally faxed it instead. The printout came through half blank, half smudged, but the name was there. And the signature at the bottom, a perfect match to the handwriting on the outside of tape 4. Do not convert. That night, I stopped trying to sleep. Sleep is for people who aren't being followed by reflections. Instead, I set up my old 8mm projector in the closet of a roadside Airbnb. No windows, thick walls. I pushed the bed against the door for good measure, and I played the tape again. I know, I wasn't supposed to, Fran said once, but curiosity is a louder voice than fear. This time the screen didn't show text. It showed the girl. Not Adira, not yet, a baby. Wrapped in gauze, held by a circle of women in black robes, their mouths sealed shut with tape, literal tape. Each woman raised 1 finger at a time until all 10 fingers were extended. Then a voice off screen said, open quote, begin the mirror, close quote. And every woman turned to the camera at once. Their eyes had no whites, only gray, like erased photographs. And then the baby blinked, the tape cut. You know how people say I couldn't breathe when they see something awful? I actually couldn't. My lungs didn't work. For a full 10 seconds, I was stuck in some kind of panic loop where my body forgot how air worked. And then I saw movement. Not on the tape, on the projector. The girl's face, projected on the plastic casing itself, staring back at me from a place she shouldn't be. I unplugged everything. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I didn't collapse. I just sat there in total darkness and waited for the adrenaline to fade. The next morning, I found something carved into the inside of the closet door, something I hadn't put there. Why did you look twice? Okay, academic voice time. There's a term in folklore studies, residual haunting. It's not a ghost, per se. It's a replay, a leftover imprint, a trauma loop. Most of the time, it's harmless. But every once in a while, the loop becomes aware that you're watching it. And when that happens, well, that's when the tape watches you back. The children who remembered. There's a strange thing that happens when you spend too long chasing lost people. You stop trusting your own memories. Was that really my voice on the voicemail from 3 nights ago? Did I actually see that girl in the motel mirror? Or worse, had I seen her years ago and only just now remembered? Memories aren't perfect. They stretch, refract. Sometimes they sneak around corners and wait for the lights to go out. That's the first thing you lose in a long investigation, certainty. The second, sleep. I was on the road again, this time toward a rural clinic near Millburn, Vermont. Not much more than a renovated farmhouse with a broken sign out front. It was run by a woman named Dr. Palling, not Greta, but her niece, Marta Palling, psychology PhD, specialized in memory regression for trauma victims. Guess what her client list included? Survivors of House of Oracles. Not many, just 3. All of them children when they left, all of them supposedly adopted into separate families, all of them remembering the exact same name in therapy, Adira. Dr. Marta wasn't thrilled to see me. Open quote, I don't give interviews, she said, squinting through her storm door, especially not to people with camcorders in their back seats. Close quote. I held up my hands. Open quote, not here to film, just want to listen. Close quote, a long pause. Then she nodded once. Inside, the place smelled like lavender oil and printer paper. A cat blinked at me from the stairs like it knew too much. Marta poured tea, but didn't touch hers, just folded her hands. Open quote, you want to know about the memory transference, she said. Not many people call it that, not unless they've already seen the tapes. Close quote. I tried not to react, but clearly she noticed. Open quote, they're not just videos, she continued. They're containers, that's what my aunt believed. Not for stories, for people, fragments of them. Close open quote, so you've seen them, I said. Close quote. Open quote, I've felt them, she corrected. I used one once to help one of the children unlock something, just one time, and for 2 weeks I dreamed in static. Close quote. The children, now grown, lived far apart, but their stories matched. All 3 remembered being in a white room, told to wear gray gowns, and shown a mirror that didn't reflect properly. The mirror was mounted in the ceiling. You could never look into it directly, only through the corner of your eye. One of them, a girl named Marcy, remembered a game called Don't Be the Last One to Blink. Another boy, Denny, remembered a whisper that came from the sink drains. Always the same phrase, open quote, what's remembered lives longer. Close quote. I never got his name, because Marta wouldn't give it. Open quote, he doesn't speak anymore, she said quietly, only writes, in symbols I can't translate, close quote. I asked if any of them remembered Adira's disappearance. Marta shook her head. Open quote, they remember her returning, close quote. That caught me off guard. Open quote, returning from where? Close quote, open quote, from under. That's the word they used. Close quote. She walked over to a locked drawer, turned a key, and pulled out a photo. It was old, sun-bleached, like a postcard someone had stepped on. 4 kids in robes standing barefoot in grass. In the center, holding a candle that looked far too heavy for her, was a girl with half her face smudged out. I don't mean blurred, I mean literally smudged, like someone had taken their thumb and erased it from the negative. The other half? It looked like Adira. I asked how the photo came into her possession. Marta hesitated, then said, open quote, "It showed up in my mailbox, no return address, no note, no explanation," close quote. And on the back, only one word, written in pencil, remember. Let's slow this down for a second. In every documented case of large group psychological control, be it cults, fringe medicine experiments, or isolated communities, you'll find traces of patterned memory implantation. Children especially are susceptible. If you give them a frame to remember within, say, a ritual or a song, they'll start to fill in blanks even if the events never happened. But here's the issue. All three survivors had memories of things that weren't in any public record. The mirror, the game, the girl with two names. Even Marta hadn't mentioned those things in therapy yet. So how did they all remember the same fragments? It wasn't standard indoctrination. It was shared encoding, as if they were wired to access the same internal reel, which meant one of two things. One, they were all lying in perfect synchronization, unlikely. Two, or something non-physical was linking them. And if that second one's true, we're not dealing with a cult. We're dealing with a living archive. You ever notice how mirrors are always associated with memory? In fairy tales, they show the truth. In horror stories, they trap the soul. In science, there's the Caputo effect, where mirrored images viewed under flickering light cause dissociative hallucinations in 65% of people. Why? Because mirrors delay your brain's update signal, just enough for it to rewrite what you're seeing. Now imagine you combine that delay with ritual chanting, sleep deprivation, and long exposure to synchronized light patterns. That's not just hypnosis, that's rewriting identity. That's the kind of thing you do if you wanted to take a child and replace what was them with someone or something else. Marta finally walked me to the door after 2 hours. But before I left, she said one last thing. Open quote, "There's one more tape," she said. Not numbered, no label, buried in an attic box after the raids. Close quote, open quote, "Where?" Close quote. Open quote, "You're not going to like the answer." Close quote. I waited. Open quote, "The old house in Hollow Creek, the one where Greta disappeared, they never demolished it." Close quote. Open quote, "Why not?" Close quote. She stared past me. Open quote, "Because the county said it wasn't done yet." The house that wasn't done yet. Some disappearances are like smoke. You chase them until your lungs burn and your fingers pass through ash. Others are like seeds. You don't even realize you've been carrying them until something starts to grow inside you. The house in Hollow Creek was supposed to be gone. The official documents said it was condemned, scheduled for demolition in 2003, and later reclassified as structurally unsound and inaccessible. Translation, buried under legal tape and someone's bad dreams. But I found it. Exactly where Marta said it would be. Just past a rusted gate, behind a line of pine trees that leaned inward like they were hiding something. The address had been scrubbed from Google Maps. No mailbox, no street sign. Just coordinates passed hand to hand, whispered like secrets. And there it was, the House of Oracles, its original building, the true center of the commune. Weather-beaten, hollow-eyed, like it had been watching the woods grow around it. You know how you can tell a house isn't just abandoned, but left behind? It doesn't creak when you walk in. It holds its breath. I stepped through the entryway, past a door that was still locked, but only loosely, and into a foyer that smelled like mildew, burnt sage, and something else. Vinegar and honey. Oddly sweet. Too sweet. A scent I'd smelled before years ago at a former sanatorium in Austria. That's when I knew this house didn't forget. It just waited. The inside was preserved like a diorama. Chairs overturned, mugs fossilized to shelves, and that eerie, sterile silence. I turned on my flashlight and moved slowly, checking each room. Living room empty save for broken picture frames. Kitchen, cobwebs in the sink, open drawers, a spoon halfway in a jar of sugar like someone had been interrupted mid-stir. And then, the red door. It wasn't red when I walked in, but now on the second floor, the last room down the hall had become a different shade. Blood paint red in matte. I know, I sound like I'm losing it. But here's the kicker. I reached out to touch it, and my fingers went through. Not like air, not like smoke, like gel. The door didn't open. It receded, pulled back into itself. I followed. One step, then another. My flashlight blinked out. Total darkness. Then light again. Not mine, but a low, sickly glow coming from recessed bulbs behind wall grates. Industrial. Medical, like a surgical room reimagined by a set designer on cough syrup. And there it was, in the center, a single chair, strapped down, facing a mirror, not hanging but embedded into the floor. You ever try to look down at a mirror angled directly beneath you? It forces you to see yourself as if you're falling, like your reflection's about to swallow you. There were speakers in the corners, old, yellowed with age. I don't know what they used to play, but now they just crackled like the inside of a damaged tape. And right in the middle of that static, I heard a voice, small, childlike. Open quote, "You came back wrong," close quote. I don't remember sitting in the chair, but I remember standing up. And in between, there were images. A girl with her head tilted too far sideways, like her neck had a second joint. A wall of hands reaching outward from inside a window. A field of gray gowns, laid out like scarecrows. And then, her, Adira. But not as a child, as a woman, standing directly across from me behind the mirror glass and smiling. Not kindly, like she knew something I didn't. Then she said it, 3 words. Same ones I'd heard on the tape. Open quote, "I remember you." Close quote. When I blinked, the room was gone. Just a blank, dusty space. No chair, no mirror, no speakers. Only my flashlight lying on the ground. Still warm, still blinking. I picked it up, turned to leave, and found a new door behind me. It hadn't been there before. White, wooden. Carved into the center was a sigil, like a sideways eye, but with 3 vertical lines through it. I'd seen it once in Marta's photo on the smudged candle Adira held. I opened it. Behind it was a box. Old metal, labeled with a scratched-on X. Inside, the tape. Unlabeled. Just like Marta said. I didn't watch it. Not yet. Not there. I slid it into my bag and backed out of the house, not running, but not walking either. The moment I crossed the tree line, my phone buzzed. First time in hours. 1 new voicemail, unknown number. No transcript. I hit play. A girl's voice. Adira's. Open quote. "Remember, you said you'd help, so help me now." Close quote. Click. Look, I don't know what's on this tape. I only know one thing for sure. This house isn't unfinished because of construction. It's unfinished because someone or something still lives there. And I wasn't the first to enter that mirror room. I just might be the last to leave it, if I even did. The last known recording. Some disappearances are about people. Others are about ideas. But sometimes it's a voice that goes missing and takes everything else with it. Let's talk about that tape. The unlabeled one. The one that was never supposed to be found. I played it 3 nights after I got back from Hollow Creek in a motel off Route 71, halfway between nowhere and someplace I used to know. Cheap walls, fuzzy TV, a bed that groaned even when you breathed on it. You get the picture. I had every intention of documenting it properly. External mic, backup recording, lights off, full charge. But I didn't even hit record because the moment I pushed play, I knew I shouldn't be listening to it. And of course, I kept listening. The tape started with static, like an old radio stuck between frequencies. Then came a voice. Not a child, not Adira. This one was male, middle-aged, calm, professional. Like a therapist or academic. Open quote, interview log number 7B. Subject Adira K, 12 years old, orientation phase, day 3. Close quote, he sounded bored, like he'd done this 100 times. Open quote, subject continues to resist Schedule A assimilation. Further exposure to mirror sequences yields anomalous results. Vocal pattern disruptions noted. Manifestation of multiplicity unresolved, close quote, silence. Except it wasn't silence. In the background, I heard something else, a low hum, mechanical, not like a motor, more like breathing through a wall. and under it the faintest music. A music box maybe, something old, winding down. Then came the second voice, Adira's, except not 12, not on day 3. She was older here, maybe late teens, and she sounded fragmented, not scared, not in pain, but like her words were stepping on each other's toes. Open quote, "You keep pulling me out, but I never left." Close quote. Click. A sudden spike of noise. Then another voice layered on top of hers, her own, but in a different tone. Lower, slower. Like two versions of Adira were speaking at the same time. Open quote, "I saw myself in the mirror, but I was behind me, and I waved, and she didn't." Close quote. The man's voice returned, urgent now. Open quote, break sequence, close quote. Then, open quote, "Who let this run unsupervised?" Close quote. The audio glitched, repeating that phrase twice. Then, for a split second, the static cleared. And I swear to you, just for a moment, I heard laughter. Not Adira's, not the man's. A third voice, closer to the mic than it should have been. Laughter like a child pretending to be something else. And then, he's listening. The screen of my camera flickered, even though I hadn't turned it on. My motel light blinked out for exactly 6 seconds, and when it came back, my room had shifted, just slightly. The bed was now facing the wrong wall. The TV screen showed a frozen frame from the tape, a girl in a mirror, blurry, arms raised. But I hadn't connected the TV. That's when I grabbed the tape, stuffed it back in its case, and tossed it in the mini fridge like that would do something. And you know what? The humming stopped. The music box wound down. Everything went still. That night I slept 2 hours, fully clothed, back to the wall, one eye open. When I woke up, the tape was gone. Fridge open, tape case empty. Only thing left inside? A small piece of white fabric. Cotton, torn, with a single handwritten word in faded ink, open quote, "Remember." Close quote. Same handwriting from the commune guest book, Marta's. But she never wrote that. I would have remembered, unless, look, I know how this sounds, like I'm unraveling. Maybe I am. But here's the question that keeps me up now. What if Adira didn't disappear? What if she was copied? What if that mirror in the house wasn't a window, but a scanner, a filter? You don't walk out of something like that unchanged. You don't even walk out as just one person. That would explain the voice distortion, the double talk, the dreams I've been having since. Every night now I hear her say it, open quote, "I'm almost through," close quote, like she's coming back, or worse, she never left. Academic circles have a name for this. It's not in DSM manuals, but it floats through psych departments and experimental neurology lectures like an urban myth, mirror convergence disorder. A theoretical condition in which a subject exposed to extended mirrored environments under sensory manipulation begins to experience refracted identity sequencing. Translation: you see too many versions of yourself and one of them takes over. They call it impossible. But what if they only say that because they're afraid it's real? What if the real danger isn't vanishing, but duplicating? What if Adira wasn't the only one scanned? What if I've been glitching ever since? I don't know who took the tape. I don't know why it survived or why it let me survive, but I'm starting to think this isn't about Hollow Creek anymore. It's about what escaped from it, and it's looking for places to reflect. Teen, you were never alone. Some disappearances are acts of cruelty, some are acts of mercy, and some are invitations. I didn't go back to Hollow Creek, not physically anyway, but pieces of it kept showing up. An empty envelope in my mailbox, no address, no return label, just a single Polaroid inside, face down. When I flipped it over, it was black, glossy, no image, like it hadn't developed or like it had been erased. A week later, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. No call history, no missed call. Just the message. Adira's voice, clear as a bell, open quote, "You're standing in the wrong place. You were always supposed to be in the mirror." Close quote. It hung there in my ears, longer than it should have, like the call had never ended. The people who used to follow the House of Mercy, they're still out there, scattered, subtle. Some live in cities. Some blend in with therapy groups, wilderness retreats, alternative health collectives. They don't call it Hollow Creek anymore. They don't have to. They only say one phrase when they know you're ready. Open quote. The second self remembers. Close quote. I heard that from a woman on a night train to Flagstaff, from a man sketching spirals in a Greyhound terminal. Once, whispered in a hotel hallway, no one was there. I've started locking all my mirrors at night. Yes, locking them. Frame, duct tape, curtain rods, the works. Because sometimes they breathe. Not metaphorically, I mean fog on the inside of the glass, condensation from something that shouldn't be alive. And on a few occasions I've seen it. Not a person, not a ghost, a reflection that forgets to mimic me. One night, I brushed my teeth and looked up, and my reflection didn't. It kept its head down, waited a beat, then grinned. I keep thinking about that first night, the one where it all started, about Adira's little red shoes sitting by the chapel door. About how I assumed she'd taken them off before she vanished. But what if she didn't? What if she left them behind because she came back barefoot? What if that's how you know you're no longer yourself? No socks, no sound, no shadow, just a quietness that waits for you to notice. And now, I don't dream anymore. Or at least, I don't remember dreaming. Instead, I wake up with little notes scribbled on my arms, backwards, like they were written by a reflection. Open quote, you left the window open. You weren't supposed to hear that. Tell them, or I will. Close quote. Sometimes I don't even know who them is, or I, or whether I'm still the first one to wake up. Academic consensus calls it an elaborate delusion. Residual hallucinations post-trauma. Sure, but I've been getting emails from a university in Austria. A professor studying recursive cognition. He says he's seen my footage, though I never uploaded it. He wants to meet. Says there are others. People who came back wrong. People who sometimes stand still in elevators for too long, who don't blink on planes, who forget which version of them is real. And now here we are. You listening. Me whispering. Maybe you think you're safe? You probably are. But if you wake up one morning and your mirror is warm to the touch, if your phone turns on by itself, playing a voice that sounds almost but not quite like your own, if you catch yourself smiling when nothing's funny, maybe double-check your reflection. See if it blinks when you do. See if it follows you out of a frame. And if it doesn't, well, welcome to Hollow Creek. You've always been here. Conclusion. If you've made it this far, I want you to take a moment now. Breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. You're safe. There's no one behind you. There's nothing in the mirror except you, sleepy-eyed and kind of beautiful in the dark. This story, like most, it doesn't need to be real to stay with you. It just needs a place to echo. So whether you believe it or not, whether you think Adira was a victim or a survivor or something in between, remember this. Sometimes things disappear not because they were taken, but because they became something we couldn't name anymore. And if you ever feel yourself slipping, losing time, catching odd glances from the other side of the glass, maybe don't panic. Maybe it's just the second self remembering. Thank you for staying with me. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and close your eyes. You've heard enough for tonight.